Have you ever changed your mind? I mean, completely changed your mind? Where you go from one point of view to the complete opposite, 180-degree change? Well, that happened to me.
The creative process is first imagining and then believing the state imagined. Always imagine and expect the best. The world cannot change until you change your conception of it. As within, so without.
It's really hard to change our mind, our beliefs. It's like trying to get something out of cement that's already hardened. It only comes with a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. It's not easy. The only way that I can describe it is that I picture a dense, thick forest, and that everybody is trying to find their way out of this dense, thick forest. And there's this popular trail that everybody's on, and this trail is full of signs and everything you would need to keep you on that trail. And everybody talks about how it's the right way. And there's all of these exits on that trail. And every single exit has a sign on it that says, "Do not enter, danger." And of course, everybody on the trail talks about how dangerous it is to take one of those exits and that nobody should take them. That those exits aren't the way out of the forest. That the trail, the main trail, that's the only way, or at least the only safe way out. But after a while, you realize you're pretty sure you're going in circles. And then, eventually, you get to the point where you're convinced it's the wrong way. And you're willing to roll the dice, to take your chances and go down one of those exits. And the only way to go down those exits is by yourself. And then you go down the exit. And eventually, you start to see light. You realize that that is taking you out of the thick, dense forest. Well, I don't know if that made sense to you or not, but I feel like if you've had some type of awakening journey, that might ring true. Because that's how it felt for me. And it all started in my hot tub. Well, what I like to call now the thought tub. And you'll see why in a minute. So it was COVID, and we were a couple weeks away from coming into another lockdown. So what I decided to do is enjoy the lockdown with a hot tub. So I went and got a hot tub, built an extra piece on my deck for it, and made it fit in there real nice. And I enjoyed it that fall and through the winter. But coming into the spring, I think it was April 1st actually, I decided to sit in my hot tub and have a puff of the devil's lettuce, wacky tobacco, also known as marijuana. I had heard people say over the years that they don't make any important life decisions without having a puff and thinking about it, or to use it in meditative practices. And I started to read about how in ancient Hebrew and other type of temples, like a few hundred years BC or more, that they had found the residue of cannabis. That they used this for religious type ceremonies and to, I guess, go deeper. So I thought I would give it a shot. So I sat there, took a puff, and just laid back. And almost instantly, it was like there was a tap, or should I say, fire hose turned on in my mind. And it was this phrase: the end times are only good news. It was very strong. it was like I tuned in to some type of powerful radio station or something. And it was just repeating over and over and over again that the end times are only good news. Now, that really meant something to me, because if you've listened to the Chris Bledsoe episode I did, I talk about my fear of the rapture, the end times, and how I had heard it when I was a kid, and it tormented me for a couple years. And I just learned to put it in the back of my mind and never give it any energy. But I have to say, it was always there. Always felt that there is some type of impending doom that I was hoping would just not happen in my lifetime. So to hear that phrase over and over and feel it in my mind and even in my body, the end times are only good news, was very powerful. And then I had this picture in my mind of like an angelic type being standing over the earth. And he had like this megaphone. And he was shouting as loud as he could shout, like an angelic shout. And he was screaming through that megaphone to wire the earth with the internet, to fill the entire earth, every nook and cranny, every single area of the earth, to fill it with the internet, with the idea that the internet will save humanity. Then I heard that we're going to find out the truth about the Bible, that we're going to find out the truth about our true history, which these are ideas, especially the history one, I have never even really heard of before that, or even thought much about it. I thought things may be off a little bit, but to the degree that this was impressed upon me was kind of shocking, especially when I heard this next part. We're going to find out the truth about giants, and that religion is going to fall. And then I had this picture in my mind, a powerful picture of these huge, massive statues, and that there were ropes on them, and people were pulling and pulling, and these massive statues were crashing to the ground. And the idea that government structures as well, along with religion, and all types of authoritarian, negative structures were going to come crashing to earth. But all along with the idea that this is good news. This is good for humanity. So that was a lot for me to think about over the next weeks and months. I didn't know if it was real, but the way things came to me felt familiar. I've had similar things happen throughout my life, but never with that much amplification. And over the next even days and weeks just after that happened, I found that I started to accidentally stumble across some of these ideas in just different podcasts or videos that I would watch. And it was in a very synchronistic way, where after a while, I began to get the feeling that the universe is actually communicating to me, and that experience in the hot tub, it just wasn't from having a puff of weed. That I somehow had unlocked something, and I was just getting started. But what I was doing is I was opening up my mind, that these ideas and thoughts gave me questions I didn't have before, and I'm a pretty curious guy, so I began to look up different ideas. And then in July, I had a very powerful dream that takes too long to explain, but it really laid a hold of me. I began to really feel that some type of transformation was going on in me. And then shortly after that, I began to, the only way I can describe it is be woken up in my sleep at night by internal voices, strange phrases or ideas, a lot of scripture verses, but from a different point of view. And this started happening on average about 4 nights a week for somewhere between 2 and 3 years. Usually, I would hear an idea or a scripture verse and then spend the next day or two researching that thought or idea. One of my favorite ones that I heard in the night is that I woke up with this idea in my mind that our heart is continually sending out signals and frequency every second of our life. And then I heard the verse, guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it flows the issues of life. That's in Proverbs. But the emphasis in my mind was something about that word issues. So I got out of bed and I started to do some Googling. And I would always look up the Greek or Hebrew and Bible verses because I really want to know what it means. And so I did that, and I found that the Hebrew word they use for issues is a word that refers to a border or a place in which things or people continually go out of. And then in the commentary, it said, it's almost as if Solomon is saying that the heart is the gateway for which things come out that affect your life. And it also explained that the idea of guarding with diligence in Hebrew paints a picture of guarding a dangerous prisoner, but at the same time protecting something, which gave me the thought that our heart is something like a nuclear reactor, where you can use it for tons of cheap energy, or you could use it to destroy the entire planet. Which again, nowadays, looking back on that, it reminds me of another thing the lady told Chris Bledsoe in the beings, that we are connected to the earth. And when we're full of negative energy, that puts the earth in a self-destruct mode. So our hearts, we really do need to guard with all diligence because they could destroy this entire world. So that idea directed me more towards guarding my thoughts, looking into teachings that discuss how our words and our mind shapes our reality. And how much negative self-talk is so self-destructive. And each month that went by, it was like there was an intensity dial. And each month, that intensity dial would be turned up another notch. And what I mean when I say the word intensity is that my belief system was opening up. It was being challenged, and I was opening up my mind to new ideas about religion, what true spirituality actually is, and what's going on in this reality. And then that fall, I'm a carpenter, and I had a job building a smokehouse for a guy I do a lot of work for so that he could smoke sausage in it. It was actually a great project. But I had a lot of time and a lot of mind space where I could listen to podcasts. And I discovered a podcast called Blurry Creatures. It's a Christian-based podcast that is a lot more open-minded than most. It's like a gateway drug for opening up your mind. That's where any Christian I would recommend would start. On it, they had a guy tell one of the best Bigfoot stories I've ever heard that's actually only a few hours away from where I live, up here in Canada. But the episodes that really got my attention were ones they had on giants, which I was always been familiar with. In Genesis 3, the verse it talks about, and there were giants in those days. And so I always wondered what was up with that. And in fact, probably about 5 years earlier, I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole. I had heard something about giants, so I started just researching it. And I remember feeling the excitement, like, imagine if this is true, that there were actually giants that walked the earth in the past. And it's funny, everything shut down for me because as I was doing my Google research, I came across a fact checking website named Snopes. And of course, they said that they looked into it and it's not true. And when I read that, my heart sank. I thought, oh, wouldn't you just know it? Of course, something exciting like that, of course it wouldn't be true. But I never thought that that site would be lying to me. It said there's no evidence and nothing to corroborate the stories. And so I forgot about it. I just dropped it. Of course, nowadays, I would never go to a fact-checking website. They're usually lying to you. So they would have different guests on talking about all the stories of giants with the Native American tribes, all kinds of stories and words for giants, with all kinds of stories of people digging up giant bones all across America. And that the Smithsonian had been suppressing that information since the early 1900s. And then one day, they had a guy on from Texas who his hobby is collecting these old newspaper articles. And at the time, I think he had about 700. And they were old newspaper stories about people digging up giant bones all across the U.S. These ancient burial mounds, before they were off limits, they would dig in them and find all kinds of crazy things. Then in, I think, the 1920s, they made it a felony to dig in a burial mound. You could go to jail for quite a while, so people stopped digging. But one day, I was following him on Instagram, and things got a little bit more real for me. Because he posted an old newspaper clipping from 1871. And it was a story about how they found a mass giant grave full of maybe 200 giants, like around 8 feet plus tall. And it was in a town a half an hour away from where I live. It was Cayuga, Ontario. If you Google Cayuga giant bones, you can read about it. I even read a letter that somebody wrote into a local newspaper at the time, talking about how he made the trip down there to look at those Cayuga giant bones, and it was well worth it. But the real strange part about this is looking into the giants. It's not that big a deal if it was 10,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago. But some of these bones they think are only between 1 and 2,000 years old. And the fact that this guy at the time had 700 different newspaper articles that he had found all across the US and even world talking about this like it was common knowledge. I'm used to it now, but at the time it left me with an uneasy kind of feeling like, what is going on? And that if that's been erased out of the collective consciousness of humanity, what else have they erased? And there's a lot of people that say that the Smithsonian, they clamped down on this, and that there's a joke that the Smithsonian has the giant bones, that they have them in warehouses. You think of the last scene of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, how there's that vast warehouse filled with stuff that's kept secret. And I'll end part 1 of my awakening with a quote from Abraham Lincoln. Now the debunkers really try to explain away this quote and he didn't mean what he said and all this stuff. But it seems to be a fact that in 1848, he gave a speech at Niagara Falls. And in this speech, he said, "The eyes of that species of extinct giants, whose bones fill the mounds of America, have gazed on Niagara as ours do now." And that really struck me. Like, from all people, a quote from Abraham Lincoln. So at that time, I'm getting ideas that the world is about to change. I'm hearing a voice speak to me like 4 nights a week and tell me things I've never heard before. And then I'm discovering that giants roamed the earth in the not too distant past, and the governing bodies have tried to hide it. So what else are they hiding? And can we handle the truth?